He beat her night after night until she spit blood for his mistress. But she divorced him and married a CEO. The truth about him came to light. The suitcase slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the penthouse like a gunshot. Celine Araminta's hands shook as she dragged it toward the bedroom door, each step sending shockwaves of agony through her broken ribs. Blood still trickled from the corner of her mouth, Dorian's latest masterpiece. But for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't cowering in fear. She was running. Celine. His roar exploded from somewhere behind her, followed by the crash of something expensive shattering against the wall. Her wedding photo, most likely. How fitting. Her bare feet slipped on the marble hallway as she heard his footsteps thundering after her. The elevator. She just had to reach the elevator. Her salvation waited 20 floors below in the parking garage. The car she'd hidden there 2 weeks ago, the one he didn't know about, filled with everything she'd managed to secretly gather. "You think you can leave me?" Dorian Kalitha's voice was getting closer, that deadly calm creeping back into his tone. The calm that always preceded the worst beatings. "After everything I've given you?" Given her? Celine almost laughed through her split lip. He'd given her nothing but pain. She had given him everything. Her family's fortune, her inheritance, her grandmother's antique jewelry collection, her trust fund, even the deed to her childhood home. All of it poured into his startup, his dreams, his empire. She had made him a millionaire while reducing herself to nothing. The elevator button glowed red under her trembling finger. "Come on, come on, come on. I know about the car, Celine." Her blood turned to ice. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice 20,000 missing from our account? Did you think I was stupid?" His footsteps stopped right behind her. She could feel his breath on her neck, smell the expensive scotch that always made him worse. "I had it towed an hour ago." The elevator doors opened with a cheerful ding that mocked her desperation. Empty. Her escape route, gone. "Turn around and look at me when I'm talking to you." This was it. This was how it would end. In this hallway, in this penthouse that she had bled to build, at the hands of the man she had loved more than her own life. The man she had sacrificed everything for. The man who was about to kill her. But as she turned to face him, as she looked into those gray eyes that had once promised her the world, something else caught her attention. Something that made her heart stop for an entirely different reason. Dorian wasn't alone. Leora Vera stood frozen in the penthouse doorway, her perfect red lips parted in shock, her designer dress immaculate while Celine stood there broken and bleeding. But that wasn't what made Celine's world tilt on its axis. It was the man standing behind Leora. Tall, commanding, with dark hair and eyes like storm clouds. A man whose face had been plastered across every business magazine in the city for the past 6 months. Cashin Draven. The CEO who was about to buy out Dorian's company. The man who held her husband's entire future in his hands. And he was staring at her with an expression of absolute horrified recognition. "My God," Cashin whispered, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "What have you done to her?" Dorian spun around, his face cycling through confusion, rage, and something that looked almost like panic. "Cashin, I can explain." "Explain." Cashin's voice was deadly quiet as he stepped into the penthouse, his presence immediately filling the space with an authority that made even Dorian step back. "Explain why your wife looks like she's been through hell. Explain why she's bleeding and trying to escape from her own home." The silence that followed was deafening. For people frozen in a tableau that would change all their lives forever. Celine felt something crack open in her chest, not her ribs this time, but something deeper. Something that had been buried under years of systematic destruction. For the first time in 3 years, someone was looking at her and seeing the truth. Someone with the power to do something about it. "Please," she whispered, and the word came out like a prayer. What do you think happens when a powerful man like Cashin Draven witnesses the truth behind closed doors? Will this be Celine's salvation, or will it make everything worse? Drop your predictions in the comments. I have a feeling you won't see what's coming next." The word hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. "Please." Cashin Draven's storm-gray eyes never left Celine's face as he stepped forward, his movements controlled but radiating barely contained fury. "Mrs. Calith, are you hurt?" Such a simple question. Such an impossible answer. Hurt? She had been systematically destroyed, piece by piece, for 3 years. But as she looked at this man, this stranger who held more genuine concern in his voice than her own husband had shown in months, something long buried stirred in her chest. The woman she used to be. The woman who had once commanded boardrooms and built dreams from nothing. "I'm fine," she whispered automatically, the lie she perfected over countless social gatherings, business dinners, and concerned phone calls from friends who had slowly stopped calling. Cashin's jaw tightened. Behind him, Leora shifted uncomfortably, her perfectly manicured hand clutching her designer purse like a shield. She looked every inch the woman Celine had once been, confident, successful, radiant. The woman Celine had been before she gave it all away for love. Before she gave it all away for this monster. "Celine, sweetheart," Dorian's voice had shifted to that sickeningly sweet tone he used in public, the one that had fooled everyone for so long. "You're being dramatic. Mr. Draven, my wife has been under a lot of stress lately. You know how emotional women can get." The patronizing words hit her like physical blows, but this time, something was different. This time, she wasn't alone with her pain. Emotional. Cashin's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Is that what you call a split lip and what looks like finger-shaped bruises around her throat?" Celine's hand instinctively moved to her neck, covering the marks she'd tried so hard to hide with makeup and scarves. No one had ever noticed before. No one had ever cared enough to look that closely. But this man, this stranger, saw everything. Who was she before this nightmare began? The memories crashed over her like a tidal wave. Celine Araminta, heir to the Araminta textile fortune. The 25-year-old woman who had graduated summa cum laude from Wharton, who had increased her family's company profits by 40% in her first year as CFO. The woman who had owned a penthouse in Manhattan, a villa in Tuscany, and a portfolio worth $50 million. The woman who had met a brilliant, passionate entrepreneur named Dorian Calith at a startup pitch competition and fallen so hard she had forgotten to breathe. He had been magnetic then, not the cold, calculating predator he'd become, but a man with fire in his eyes and dreams that seemed to burn brighter than the sun. His tech company was revolutionary, he'd said. It would change the world. All he needed was backing, someone who believed in him. Someone who believed in them. "I remember the day you mortgaged your family estate," she whispered now, her voice growing stronger as the memories flooded back. The room went deadly silent. "You said it was temporary. Just until the first round of funding came through." Dorian's face went pale. "Celine, don't." "I remember signing over my trust fund," she continued, her eyes never leaving his face. $2.7 million. You said we were partners. That we were building something beautiful together." "Stop." The word cracked like a whip, but for the first time in 3 years, it didn't make her flinch. "I remember when you asked me to liquidate my grandmother's jewelry collection. The pieces that had been in my family for 6 generations. You said you needed just a little more capital. Just enough to get us over the finish line." Cashin stepped closer, his presence somehow making her feel safer than she had in years. "How much did you give him?" The number fell from her lips like a confession. "Everything. $73 million. My entire inheritance, my properties, my investments, my family's business. I gave him everything I had because I loved him. And because I believed he loved me." "My God," Leora breathed, speaking for the first time since entering the penthouse. Her voice was barely a whisper. 73 million? "That's how Calith Industries was born," Celine said, her voice growing steadier with each word. She was remembering who she used to be, the woman who had never been afraid to speak truth to power. Not from his brilliance. Not from his hard work. From my sacrifice. From everything I was willing to lose for love. And now? Cashin asked quietly. What do you have left? Celine looked around the penthouse, at the marble floor she had chosen, the artwork she had selected, the furniture she had picked out when she still believed in their future together. All of it bought with her money. All of it in his name. Nothing, she whispered. He made sure I have nothing. No money, no property, no family business to return to. He systematically stripped away everything I was, everything I had, until all that was left was this. She gestured to her bruised face, her broken body. His personal punching bag. The silence that followed was deafening. But in that silence, Celine felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. She felt heard. She felt believed. She felt seen. When did it start? Cashin's voice was gentle now, like he was speaking to something fragile and precious. 6 months after the IPO, she said. When Caliph Industries went public and he became worth $200 million overnight. When he realized he didn't need me anymore, that's when I met Leora. She turned to look at the other woman, beautiful, polished, everything Celine had once been. How long? She asked simply. Leora's perfectly glossed lips trembled. I didn't know about any of this. He told me you were separated, that you were getting divorced. He said. That I was crazy? Celine supplied. That I was unstable? That I was trying to take half of his company in the divorce. The guilty flush on Leora's face was answer enough. Dorian had been playing them both. Using them both. Destroying them both in different ways. But now the truth was out. And standing before them was the one man in the city with enough power to make sure Dorian Caliph finally faced consequences for what he had done. The question was, what would Cashin Draven do with this information? Cashin Draven reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, his movements deliberate and controlled. The silence in the penthouse was suffocating as he scrolled through his contacts, his storm-gray eyes never leaving Dorian's increasingly panicked face. What are you doing? Dorian's voice cracked slightly, the polished businessman facade finally beginning to crumble. Calling my lawyers, Cashin replied calmly. And then the police. Wait. Dorian lurched forward, desperation bleeding through his carefully constructed mask. You don't understand the situation. Celine she's not well. She's been seeing therapists, taking medications. Stop. The single word from Cashin carried such authority that even Dorian fell silent. Every word you speak makes this worse for you. Celine watched in stunned amazement as her husband, the man who had controlled every aspect of her life for 3 years, actually stepped backward. She had never seen Dorian retreat from anyone before. Never seen him show fear. But Cashin Draven wasn't just anyone. Mrs. Caliph, Cashin turned to her, his voice gentling completely. I want you to listen to me very carefully. I am going to make you an offer, and I want you to know that you have every right to refuse it. Do you understand? She nodded, not trusting her voice. I am withdrawing my acquisition offer for Caliph Industries, effective immediately. The words hit the room like a bomb. Dorian's face went white as sheet. You can't. The contracts are already drawn up. The board has approved. The board works for me, Cashin said without looking at him. And I've just changed my mind. He kept his eyes on Celine. Instead, I'm making you a different proposition. Her heart hammered against her broken ribs. What kind of proposition? I want to buy your stake in the company. She doesn't have a stake, Dorian snarled. Everything belongs to the woman who funded it, Cashin interrupted smoothly. $73 million in initial capital makes Mrs. Caliph the primary investor in Caliph Industries, whether her name is on the papers or not, and why legal team is very good at proving these things. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Celine's feet. I don't understand. You will, Cashin promised. But first, you need medical attention. And you need to get out of this house. He finally turned to face Dorian, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Tonight. She's not going anywhere, Dorian said, but his voice lacked its usual venom. For the first time since she'd known him, he sounded afraid. Actually, she is. Cashin moved closer to Celine, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something clean and woodsy, nothing like the cloying scent Dorian wore. Mrs. Caliph, would you like to leave here with me? My driver is waiting downstairs. I can take you to a hospital, or a hotel, or anywhere else you feel safe. Safe. When was the last time she had felt safe anywhere? If she leaves with you, Dorian said, his voice rising to a dangerous pitch, if she tries to take what's mine. What's yours? Cashin's laugh was cold as winter steel. Mr. Caliph, you seem to be under the impression that you have some kind of power in this situation. Let me clarify something for you. He pulled out his phone again and pressed a button. Immediately, it began recording. My name is Cashin Draven, CEO of Draven Industries. The time is 9:47 p.m., and I am in the penthouse of Mr. Dorian Caliph. I have just witnessed Mr. Caliph threatening his wife, who shows clear signs of physical abuse including facial bruising, a split lip, and what appear to be defensive wounds on her arms. You bastard, Dorian hissed. I am also recording the admission that Mrs. Celine Caliph provided $73 million in funding for Caliph Industries, money which appears to have been systematically stolen from her through coercion and abuse. Cashin's voice never wavered. This recording will be provided to the police, the SEC, and my legal team within the hour. The blood drained from Dorian's face completely. Now, Cashin continued, stopping the recording, let's discuss your options. Option 1. Mrs. Caliph leaves with me tonight, voluntarily, and you never contact her again. In which case, this becomes a civil matter that my lawyers will handle quietly. And Option 2. Dorian's voice was barely a whisper. Cashin smiled, and it was absolutely terrifying. Option 2 is that you try to stop her from leaving, or you threaten her in any way, and I make it my personal mission to destroy everything you've built. I will expose every fraudulent transaction, every embezzled dollar, every lie you've told to investors. I will ensure that you spend the next 20 years in federal prison, while Mrs. Caliph recovers every penny you stole from her. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire about to snap. Then Leora spoke up from the doorway, her voice small and shaky. Dorian? Is it true? All of it? Dorian turned to look at his mistress, and for a moment, Celine saw something almost human flicker across his features. Regret? Shame? But then his face hardened again. Leora, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. Leora's voice grew stronger. You lied to me. About everything. About her, about the money, about who you really are. She looked at Celine with something that might have been respect. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. And then she turned and walked out, her heels clicking across the marble floor until the elevator doors closed behind her. Now it was just the three of them. So, Cashin said calmly, extending his hand toward Celine. What do you say, Mrs. Caliph? Ready to reclaim your life? For 3 years, Celine had been afraid to make any decision without Dorian's permission. She had been trained to seek his approval, to cower from his rage, to accept whatever scraps of affection he chose to throw her way. But as she looked at this stranger's outstretched hand, this man who had appeared like an avenging angel in her darkest moment, she felt something she hadn't experienced in so long she'd forgotten what it felt like. Hope. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers were warm and steady, completely unlike Dorian's cold touch. And when Cashin helped her to her feet, when he carefully steadied her as she swayed from pain and shock and 3 years of systematic abuse, she felt something else. She felt protected. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, Cashin said softly, his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles. We haven't even begun to fight. Behind them, Dorian made a sound like a wounded animal. But for the first time in 3 years, Celine didn't turn around to see what was wrong. She didn't ask if he was okay. She didn't apologize for existing. Instead, she walked toward the elevator with her head held high, her hand secure in Cashin's grip, ready to discover who she could become when she wasn't being destroyed by the man who was supposed to love her. The elevator doors opened, and Celine stepped inside without looking back. She was finally free. What do you think will happen when Dorian realizes he's lost everything? His wife, his mistress, and his empire? And what about this instant connection between Celine and Cashin? Share your thoughts below. Something tells me this is just the beginning of the storm. 3 weeks later, Celine Araminta stood in the floor-to-ceiling windows of Cashin's private office on the 62nd floor of Draven Tower, watching the city spread out below her like a glittering circuit board. The bruises on her face had faded to yellow shadows, her split lip had healed, and for the first time in 3 years, she could take a deep breath without wincing. But the real healing was happening somewhere deeper. The forensic accountants found another shell company, Cashin said from behind his desk, his voice carefully controlled. Dorian's been funneling money offshore for 2 years. We're up to 12 million now. Celine turned from the window, smoothing down the emerald silk blouse that Cashin's assistant had helped her pick out yesterday. Everything in her old wardrobe had been chosen by Dorian. Conservative cuts, muted colors, anything to make her invisible. Now, wearing clothes that actually fit her properly, she was remembering what it felt like to take up space in the world. 12 million of my money, she said, and her voice didn't shake anymore when she said it. Your money, Cashin confirmed. He looked up from the legal documents scattered across his mahogany desk, and something flickered in his storm-gray eyes. You know, you could have been a formidable CEO yourself, if circumstances had been different. The compliment sent warmth through her chest. When was the last time someone had acknowledged her intelligence? Her capabilities? I was once, she said quietly. Before he made you forget who you were. Cashin stood up, moving around his desk with that controlled grace she was learning to recognize. But you're remembering now, aren't you? She was. God help her, she was. Working with Cashin's legal team had awakened something in her that had been dormant for years. The sharp, analytical mind that had once increased her family's profits by 40%. The negotiation skills that had closed deals worth millions. The strategic thinking that had made her one of the youngest CFOs in her industry. Dorian had systematically destroyed her confidence, made her doubt every decision, question every instinct. But piece by piece, Cashin was helping her rebuild herself. There's something else, Cashin said, moving closer to where she stood by the window. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the flecks of silver in his dark eyes. My investigators found evidence that Dorian has been physically abusing other women. Not just you. The words hit her like ice water. Other women? 3 of them that we know of. All employees at Calith Industries. All women he had power over. Cashin's jaw tightened. All women who were afraid to come forward because he controlled their careers, their livelihoods. Celine closed her eyes, feeling sick. She had thought she was alone in her suffering. She had thought she was the only one stupid enough, weak enough, to let him. Stop, Cashin said gently, as if he could read her thoughts. I can see what you're thinking, and you need to stop. This isn't your fault. None of it was ever your fault. When she opened her eyes, he was standing right in front of her, close enough to touch. Close enough that she could see the genuine anger burning in his gaze. Not anger at her, but anger for her. How do you do that? She whispered. Do what? Make me feel like I'm worth something. The question hung between them, heavy with 3 years of systematic emotional destruction. Cashin reached up slowly, telegraphing his movement, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed gently against her cheek. Because you are worth something, Celine. You're worth everything. The way he said her name, like it was something precious, something to be cherished, made her heart stutter in her chest. When was the last time someone had touched her with gentleness instead of violence? When was the last time someone had looked at her and seen strength instead of weakness? Cashin. She breathed, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, to the electric tension crackling between them, to the way his thumb traced along her jawline like she was made of spun glass. Then his phone rang, shattering the moment. Cashin stepped back, professional mask sliding back into place, but not before she caught the flash of regret in his eyes. "Draven," he answered curtly. Celine turned back to the window, her cheeks still tingling from his touch, her heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with possibility. She was falling for him. Despite everything she'd been through, despite every reason she had to never trust another man again, she was falling for Cashin Draven. And that terrified her almost as much as it thrilled her. "That was my head of security," Cashin said, ending the call. "Dorian's been trying to contact you. Phone calls, emails, flowers sent to your hotel. He's also been spreading rumors about your mental health to business reporters." The spell was broken. Reality crashed back in like a cold wave. "What kind of rumors?" she asked, though she already knew. "That you're unstable. That you're making false accusations to get revenge for an affair. That you're trying to steal his company through frivolous lawsuits." Cashin's voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the fury underneath. Standard abuser playbook. Discredit the victim, make her seem crazy. Celine felt that familiar tightness in her chest, the panic response that Dorian had trained into her over years of gaslighting and manipulation. For a moment, she was right back in that penthouse, small and scared and convinced that maybe she really was losing her mind. Then she remembered the forensic evidence. The shell companies. The $12 million. The other women. "He's afraid," she realized suddenly. "He's actually afraid of me." "He should be," Cashin said grimly. "We have enough evidence to destroy him completely. The SEC is launching a formal investigation. The FBI is looking into the money laundering. And tomorrow, 3 more women are going on the record about his abuse. Tomorrow. There's going to be a press conference. Full media circus. Your story, their stories, all of it." Cashin moved back to his desk, pulling out a thick folder. "Which brings me to something we need to discuss." Celine felt her stomach drop. "What?" "I want you to speak at the press conference. Tell your story, in your own words, to the world." The folder slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, papers scattering across the floor. "I can't. Cashin, I can't do that. You don't understand what he'll do. He can't hurt you anymore." Cashin was around the desk in an instant, kneeling beside her as she scrambled to pick up the fallen documents. "Celine, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, seeing her fear reflected in his concerned gaze. "He can't hurt you anymore," he repeated. "I won't let him. My security team won't let him. The law won't let him. But more than that, you won't let him. You're not the same woman who was trapped in that penthouse 3 weeks ago." "How can you be so sure?" "Because the woman who was trapped in that penthouse wouldn't have walked out, wouldn't have fought back, wouldn't be sitting here right now, planning to take down one of the most powerful men in the city." His hands covered hers, warm and steady. "You're not a victim anymore, Celine. You're a survivor. And tomorrow, you're going to help other women become survivors too." The weight of his words, the faith in his voice, the absolute certainty that she was capable of this, it was overwhelming. For 3 years, she had been told she was nothing. That she was weak, worthless, crazy. But maybe Cashin was right. Maybe she wasn't that woman anymore. "Will you be there?" she asked quietly. "At the press conference. Try to keep me away." That night, As Celine lay in her hotel bed staring at the ceiling, she thought about tomorrow. About facing the cameras, the reporters, the world. About telling her story not as a victim, but as a woman who had reclaimed her power. She thought about the other women who would stand beside her, who had found the courage to speak their truth. And she thought about Cashin, about the way he looked at her like she hung the stars, about the gentle reverence in his touch. For the first time in 3 years, Celine Araminta fell asleep without nightmares. But across the city, in a penthouse that had once been their shared prison, Dorian Caliph was wide awake, making plans of his own. The press conference was supposed to start at 2 p.m. By 1:45, the Draven Industries conference room was packed with reporters, cameras, and enough media attention to make national headlines. Celine sat in the green room, her hands trembling as she reviewed her statement one final time. "My name is Celine Araminta, and I am a survivor of domestic violence and financial abuse." "You don't have to do this," Cashin said quietly from beside her. He had been her anchor all morning, steady and reassuring, but she could see the concern in his storm-gray eyes. "We have enough evidence without your testimony. I won't let anyone pressure you into." "I want to do this," she interrupted, and she meant it. For the first time in 3 years, she was choosing to use her voice instead of having it silenced. Those other women deserved to know they're not alone. Through the green room's window, she could see the 3 other women who would be speaking alongside her. Maria Santos, a former marketing director at Caliph Industries. Jennifer Park, an accountant who had quit after 6 months of harassment. Rebecca Chen, a junior executive who had finally found the courage to come forward after seeing Celine's story in the preliminary legal filings. They were all so young. All so brave. All carrying scars that Dorian Caliph had given them. 5 minutes, Cashin's assistant announced from the doorway. Celine stood, smoothing down the navy business suit that made her feel like the CEO she had once been destined to become. As she turned toward the door, Cashin caught her hand. "Celine." His voice was rough with emotion. "I need you to know something." She looked up at him, her heart catching at the intensity in his gaze. "What you're doing today, it's the bravest thing I've ever witnessed." "And he stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "I'm honored to know you. To be part of your fight." The words hit her like a warm wave, giving her strength she didn't know she possessed. Without thinking, she rose up on her toes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving me back my life." Then she walked through the door and into the conference room, where dozens of cameras were waiting to capture her truth. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of questions, answers, and flashbulbs. Celine told her story with a steady voice, detailing the systematic abuse, the stolen money, the way Dorian had isolated her from everyone who might have helped. The other women spoke with equal courage, painting a picture of a predator who used his power to destroy anyone who trusted him. It was cathartic. It was necessary. It was justice. And then everything went to hell. Mrs. Caliph, a reporter in the back row, called out, "What do you say to allegations that this entire press conference is motivated by revenge rather than truth?" Celine frowned. "I'm not sure what you mean." "The allegations made this morning by Mrs. Victoria Araminta, your late father's sister." The blood drained from Celine's face. Victoria Araminta. Her aunt. The woman who had tried to contest her inheritance 3 years ago, who had accused Celine of being an unfit heir to the family fortune. What allegations? Cashin's voice was sharp as he leaned toward his microphone. The reporter smiled like a shark scenting blood. Mrs. Victoria Araminta held her own press conference this morning, claiming that her niece has a history of mental illness, drug abuse, and pathological lying. She has documentation showing that Celine was committed to a psychiatric facility twice during her marriage, and that she has been taking antipsychotic medications for paranoid delusions. The room erupted. Cameras swung toward Celine as reporters shouted questions. The other women looked shocked and confused. And through it all, Celine sat frozen, her mind reeling. Because it was true. Part of it, anyway. She had been hospitalized. Twice. After particularly brutal beatings that had left her broken and suicidal. And yes, there had been medications, antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs prescribed by doctors who had believed Dorian's lies about her being unstable. But this was exactly what Dorian had promised would happen if she ever tried to leave him. He had spent 3 years building a paper trail that would make her look crazy if she ever spoke out. Mrs. Califf? The reporter pressed. Do you have a response to these allegations? Celine opened her mouth, but no words came out. This was it. This was how it ended. Not with justice or healing or truth, but with the same lies and manipulations that had trapped her for years. Then Cashin's hand covered hers on the table, warm and steadying. Yes, he said into his microphone, his voice carrying the authority of a man who owned half the city. We have a response. He stood up, and the room fell silent. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing right now is a textbook example of how abusers maintain control over their victims even after the abuse is ended. Mr. Dorian Califf has spent 3 years systematically destroying his wife's credibility, creating false medical records, and bribing family members to support his narrative. That's a serious accusation, the reporter began. It's also provable, Cashin cut him off. Because this morning, my investigation team uncovered something very interesting about Mr. Califf's past. He nodded to his assistant, who began distributing folders to the reporters. What you'll find in those folders is documentation proving that Dorian Califf has done this before. Not once, not twice, but 4 times over the past 15 years. 4 different women, 4 different relationships, all following the exact same pattern. Celine stared at him in shock. This was news to her. In each case, Cashin continued, Mr. Califf targeted wealthy, successful women. He isolated them from their support systems, gained control of their finances, and then began a campaign of systematic abuse. When the women tried to leave or seek help, he had them committed to psychiatric facilities, claiming they were delusional or suicidal. The room was dead silent now. 3 of those women are dead, Cashin said, his voice heavy with grief and rage. 1 suicide, 1 accidental overdose. 1 car accident that police are now reopening as a potential homicide. The 4th woman, Patricia Thornfield, disappeared completely after her divorce was finalized. Her body was found 6 months later in a lake upstate. Celine felt like she was going to be sick. Patricia Thornfield, she whispered. I remember that case. It was in all the papers 5 years ago. Patricia Thornfield was Dorian's second wife, Cashin confirmed. She left him a fortune worth $40 million. Money that he used to expand his business and attract his third target, a real estate heiress named Amanda Cross. The reporter who had started this ambush was frantically scribbling notes now, his gotcha moment completely derailed. Amanda Cross also died under suspicious circumstances, Cashin continued. But not before she transferred $35 million to her husband. And then there was wife number 4, Isabella Martinez, who brought a tech portfolio worth $60 million to the marriage. What happened to Isabella? Another reporter called out. She's in a psychiatric facility in Switzerland, diagnosed with severe PTSD and dissociative disorder. She's been there for 2 years, ever since she tried to expose her husband's abuse and was subsequently committed by family members who believed his lies about her mental health. The pieces clicked together in Celine's mind with horrifying clarity. She wasn't Dorian's first victim. She wasn't even his 5th victim. She was part of a pattern that stretched back over a decade and had left a trail of broken women in its wake. Mrs. Califf, Cashin said gently, turning back to her, you are the first woman to survive Dorian Califf long enough to fight back. You are the first one brave enough to speak the truth before it was too late. Tears were streaming down her face now, but they weren't tears of shame or fear anymore. They were tears of rage. Of grief for the women who hadn't made it out. of determination to make sure no other woman would suffer what she had suffered. "How many?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the silent room. "How many women has he killed?" "We don't know yet," Cashin admitted. "But we're going to find out. And we're going to make sure he never hurts anyone ever again." The press conference exploded back into chaos, but this time it wasn't directed at Celine. This time, the reporters were demanding answers about a serial abuser who had been hiding in plain sight for over a decade. As the cameras flashed and the questions flew, Celine felt something shift inside her chest. The last vestiges of the scared, broken woman Dorian had tried to create crumbled away completely. In their place stood someone new. Someone strong. Someone who had looked into the face of evil and survived. Someone who was going to make damn sure that Dorian Caliph paid for every single life he had destroyed. Can you imagine discovering you weren't just a victim, but the only survivor in a pattern of murders? How do you think Celine will channel this revelation? Into fear or into the fury needed to finally destroy the monster? Drop your thoughts below. This changes everything. The explosion happened at 3:17 a.m. Celine jolted awake in her hotel suite as the windows rattled and car alarms shrieked from the street below. For a moment, still caught between sleep and consciousness, she thought it was thunder. Then she saw the orange glow painting her ceiling, smelled the acrid smoke seeping through the ventilation system. Something was burning. Something big. She stumbled to the window and looked down at the street 60 floors below, where fire trucks were already screaming toward a building 3 blocks away. Even from this distance, she could see the flames shooting up into the night sky like angry fingers. Her phone rang, Cashin's number flashing on the screen. "Thank God," his voice was rough with relief when she answered. "Are you hurt? Are you safe?" "I'm fine, but what?" "It's my building," he said, and she could hear sirens in the background of his call. "Someone bombed Draven Tower. My offices, the server room, all of it. Gone." The blood drained from her face. The evidence. All the files about Dorian's other victims. Destroyed. Every piece of physical evidence we had collected over the past month. The forensic accounting records, the witness statements, the psychiatric reports from Switzerland. All of it. Celine sank onto her bed, the enormity of what this meant crashing over her like a cold wave. Without that evidence, they had nothing but their own testimony against a man who had spent 15 years perfecting the art of making women look crazy. But the digital backups, she started. The servers were the primary target. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were looking for. Cashin's voice was grim. "Celine, you need to pack your things. Right now. My security team is on their way to get you." "Why? What's happened?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched too long. Cashin. "Maria Santos is dead." The phone slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering to the hotel room floor. Maria. Sweet, brave Maria who had stood up at the press conference yesterday and told her story with such courage. Maria who had 3 young children and a husband who loved her. She picked up the phone with shaking hands. "How?" "Car accident. Single vehicle, lost control on a curve she's driven 1,000 times before." "But Celine," his voice broke. The brake lines were cut. This was her fault. By speaking out, by encouraging other women to come forward, she had painted targets on their backs. Dorian wasn't just destroying evidence now. He was eliminating witnesses. And she was next. "Where are you?" she whispered. "At the bomb site with the police. But I'm sending Marcus to get you. He'll be there in 10 minutes. Marcus. Cashin's head of security. A former Navy SEAL who took his job very seriously. If Marcus was coming for her, it meant Cashin believed she was in real danger. "What about Jennifer and Rebecca?" she asked, referring to the other 2 women who had spoken at the press conference. "Already in protective custody. You should have been too, but I thought the hotel security was enough." She could hear the self-recrimination in his voice. I was wrong. I underestimated how desperate he's become. A soft knock at her hotel room door made her freeze. Room service, a muffled voice called. Celine hadn't ordered room service. It was after 3 a.m. No hotel provided room service at this hour unless specifically requested. Cashin, she whispered into the phone, backing away from the door. Someone's here. Don't answer it. Marcus is still 5 minutes out. Can you get to the stairwell? The knock came again, more insistent this time. Mrs. Caliph? I have a delivery from Mr. Draven. Her blood turned to ice. Cashin was on the phone with her. He hadn't sent anything. The fire exit, she breathed, already moving toward her suitcase. I can. The hotel room door exploded inward. Not literally, there was no bomb this time. But the violence of it, the way the security chain snapped and the deadbolt tore through the doorframe, was just as shocking. 2 men in dark suits stepped through the ruined doorway, and Celine recognized one of them immediately. Victor Kane, Dorian's personal lawyer and fixer. The man who had made Patricia Thornfield disappear. The man who had arranged for Isabella Martinez to be committed to a Swiss psychiatric facility. The man who was here to make sure Celine never testified again. Hello, Mrs. Caliph, Victor said pleasantly, as if he hadn't just broken into her hotel room in the middle of the night. I think it's time you and your husband had a conversation. Celine. Cashin's voice was shouting from the phone she'd dropped. What's happening? Victor nodded to his companion, who crushed the phone under his heel. Now then, Victor continued, pulling out a syringe filled with clear liquid. We can do this the easy way, or we can do it the hard way. But either way, you're coming with us. Celine looked around the hotel suite desperately. The window was 60 floors up with no balcony. The door was blocked by 2 men who looked like they could bench press a car. The bathroom had no other exit. She was trapped. Just like she'd been trapped in that penthouse for 3 years. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't the same woman who had cowered and accepted whatever cruelty was dealt to her. This time, she had tasted freedom. She had remembered her own strength. This time, she was going to fight. The hard way then, she said, and grabbed the heavy crystal vase from the side table. What followed was chaos. Celine swung the vase at Victor's head, missing but shattering it against the wall in an explosion of glass and flowers. The second man lunged for her, but she was already moving, muscle memory from self-defense classes she'd taken in college kicking in after years of dormancy. She made it as far as the doorway before Victor's hand closed around her wrist, spinning her back into the room with enough force to send her stumbling into the coffee table. Enough games, Victor snarled, his pleasant mask finally slipping to reveal the monster underneath. Do you have any idea what your little press conference cost us? The contracts we've lost? The investigations that are now breathing down our necks. Good, Celine spat, tasting blood from where she'd bitten her tongue in the fall. I hope it destroys all of you. Oh, it won't, Victor assured her, advancing with the syringe. Because you're going to recant everything you said. You're going to admit that you made it all up, that you're mentally unstable, that you've been having paranoid delusions. Like hell I will. Like hell you won't, Victor smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression she'd ever seen. You see, we've learned from our mistakes with the other wives. Killing them created too many questions, too much attention. But making them disappear into the mental health system? That's much cleaner. He held up the syringe, and Celine could see her death sentence in that clear liquid. Ketamine mixed with a few other interesting compounds. By the time we're done with you, you'll be so dissociated from reality that no one will believe a word you say. You'll spend the rest of your life in a padded room, just like Isabella Martinez, knowing that no one will ever believe your stories about the big bad businessman who hurt you. The second man grabbed her arms, holding her still as Victor approached with a needle. This was it. This was how her story ended. not with justice or healing or love, but trapped in her own mind, unable to speak the truth, unable to save the next woman who would fall into Dorian's web. Unless... Wait, she gasped. There's something you need to know first. Victor paused, the needle inches from her arm. What? The evidence you destroyed tonight? That wasn't the only copy. Victor's eyes narrowed. You're lying. Am I? Celine met his gaze steadily, channeling every ounce of the boardroom confidence she'd once possessed. Do you really think Cassian Draven would put all his eggs in one basket? Do you think a man who built a billion-dollar empire would be that stupid? She could see doubt creeping into Victor's expression. There are copies, she continued, her voice growing stronger. Hidden in places you'll never find them. And if I don't check in with Cassian's people every 12 hours, those copies go to every major news outlet in the country. It was a lie. A complete fabrication born of desperation. But it was the kind of lie that might buy her time. Time for Marcus to arrive. Time for someone to realize she was missing. Time for a miracle. Victor studied her face for a long moment, then slowly lowered the syringe. You know what? He said conversationally. It doesn't matter. Because even if there are other copies, even if your boyfriend has backups hidden all over the city, it won't save you. He nodded to his companion, who produced a gun from inside his jacket. Suicide, Victor explained, almost apologetically. Overwhelmed by guilt over the lies she told, unable to live with the damage she'd caused to an innocent man's reputation. It's actually quite poetic. The gun was cold against her temple, and Celine closed her eyes. She thought about Cassian, about the way he looked at her like she hung the stars. She thought about the gentle reverence in his touch, the way he had helped her remember who she used to be. She thought about Maria Santos, dead because she had been brave enough to speak the truth. She thought about Patricia Thornfield, Amanda Cross, Isabella Martinez. All the women who had suffered and died because of Dorian Calitha's monstrous appetites. And she thought about all the women who would come after her if she failed. Do it, she whispered. Victor frowned. What? Pull the trigger, Celine said, opening her eyes to meet his confused gaze. Kill me. Add another body to Dorian's count. Because that's all you know how to do, isn't it? Destroy women who are stronger than you. What are you doing? Victor demanded. I'm calling your bluff, Celine said, and for the first time since they'd entered her room, she smiled. Because you can't kill me here. Too messy, too many witnesses. Hotel security footage showing you entering my room. Too many people who know I was in danger. The gun wavered slightly against her temple. You need me alive long enough to get me somewhere else. Somewhere you can stage my suicide properly. Which means you need me cooperative. She looked directly into Victor's eyes. And I will never ever cooperate with you. For a moment, the room was silent except for the distant sound of sirens still wailing in the night. Then Victor lowered the gun. Fine, he said. We'll do this the hard way after all. The syringe bit into her arm like a viper's fang, and Celine felt her world dissolve into chemical darkness. The last thing she heard before unconsciousness claimed her was the sound of her hotel room door slamming shut, and the distant wail of sirens that would arrive just moments too late. The ketamine was supposed to steal her voice. Instead, it gave her clarity. Celine floated in the chemical haze, her body numb but her mind strangely sharp, like a blade honed by desperation. She could hear Victor and his companion talking in the front seat of the van, their voices filtering through the fog of drugs like distant thunder. Should have used more, the unnamed man was saying. She's still conscious. The dose was calculated precisely, Victor replied. Too much and she dies before we can stage the suicide. Too little and she fights back. This is perfect, aware enough to experience everything, helpless enough to do nothing about it. They thought she was broken. They thought the drugs had turned her into another Isabella Martinez, trapped in her own mind while her body became a puppet for their manipulation. They were wrong. The ketamine had done something unexpected. Instead of fragmenting her consciousness, it had stripped away the layers of fear and trauma that had been clouding her judgment for years. For the first time since her marriage to Dorian began, Celine could think with perfect, crystalline clarity. And what she thought was this: she was not going to die tonight. Through the van's tinted windows, she could see they were heading toward the industrial district on the outskirts of the city. Abandoned warehouses and empty lots. The perfect place to stage a suicide where no one would hear her scream. But they had made a mistake. In their arrogance, they had underestimated her. Again. Victor's phone rang, and she heard Dorian's voice through the speaker, sharp with anxiety. "Is it done?" "Almost. We're en route to the location now. She'll be found tomorrow morning. Apparent suicide. Case closed." "Good. The FBI is asking too many questions about the bombing. We need this finished before." "Before what?" Victor interrupted. A pause. Then Dorian's voice, quieter now, before they realized the bombing was a distraction. Celine's blood turned to ice water, even through the chemical haze. "What do you mean, a distraction?" "The real evidence was never in Draven's building," Dorian said, and she could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "It's in a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Has been since the day after the press conference. Cashin Draven is smarter than we gave him credit for." Victor cursed. "Then why did we bomb the building?" "To make them think they'd won. To make them careless. While they're mourning their lost evidence and planning my wife's funeral, I'll be retrieving the real files and destroying them properly." The van hit a pothole, and Celine's head lolled to the side, giving her a view of the dashboard clock. 4:23 a.m. In 3 hours, the bank would open. In 3 hours, Dorian would destroy the only real evidence of his crimes. Unless she stopped him. The ketamine was wearing off faster than Victor had calculated. Celine could feel sensation returning to her fingertips, could flex her toes inside her shoes. Whatever dose he'd given her, it wasn't enough to keep her under for the full duration of their plan. She had maybe 20 minutes before they reached their destination. 20 minutes to figure out how to escape from a moving van while pretending to be unconscious. 20 minutes to save not just her own life, but the lives of every woman who would come after her. The van slowed, turning into what sounded like a gravel parking lot. Through her barely open eyelids, Celine could see the hulking silhouette of an abandoned warehouse against the pre-dawn sky. This was it. Her last chance. As Victor and his companion got out of the van, she heard the distinctive chirp of a cell phone receiving a text message. Victor's phone. "What is it?" the other man asked. "Draven," Victor said, and she could hear the frown in his voice. "He's at the police station, filing a missing persons report." "So? She's been missing for less than 2 hours. He's also requesting immediate access to the safety deposit box. Says he has reason to believe his girlfriend's life is in danger and the evidence to save her is in that box." A long pause. How could he know about the box? "He couldn't," Victor said slowly. "Unless—" The van door slammed open, and rough hands dragged Celine out onto the gravel. She let her body remain limp, her breathing shallow, even as the stones bit into her knees through her pajama pants. "Wake up, princess," Victor snarled, slapping her across the face hard enough to make her ears ring. "Time to have a little chat." Celine let her eyes flutter open, feigning confusion and disorientation. What?" "You're going to call your boyfriend," Victor said, holding up her phone. "You're going to tell him you're fine, that you decided to go away for a few days to think. You're going to tell him to stop looking for you." "And if I don't?" Victor smiled that terrible smile again. "Then we'll make sure your death is much more painful than originally planned." He held the phone out to her, and Celine stared at it with apparent fear. Inside, though, her mind was racing. Cashin was at the police station. He knew about the safety deposit box. which meant he had been planning for this possibility all along. He had never trusted that the evidence in his building was safe. But more importantly, it meant he was looking for her. And if she could give him the right clues. "Okay," she whispered, taking the phone with trembling hands. "I'll call him." Victor nodded to his companion, who pressed the gun against her temple again. "Remember, one wrong word and you're dead." Celine dialed Cashin's number, her heart hammering against her ribs. He answered on the first ring. "Celine? Thank God. Where are you? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she said, and was proud that her voice only shook a little. I needed some time to think." "Think about what?" "Celine, your hotel room was destroyed. There was blood on the carpet." "I know, I'm sorry. I just got scared after the bombing, and I went to that place we talked about. You know, where you said you used to go as a child when you were afraid." There was a pause. They had never talked about any such place. "Celine," Cashin said carefully, "I need you to tell me exactly where you are." "The old warehouse district," she said, meeting Victor's eyes steadily. "You know, where your father used to take you fishing. By the river." Another pause. Longer this time. "I understand," Cashin said, and she could hear something changing in his voice. "Celine, I need you to stay exactly where you are. Don't move. Don't go anywhere. I'm coming to get you." "You don't need to." "Yes, I do. And Celine? I love you." The line went dead. Victor was staring at her suspiciously. What was that about fishing? "He used to go fishing with his father when he was young," Celine lied smoothly. "I was just trying to sound normal, like we'd talked about meeting there." Victor studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Now we wait for him to stop looking and go home like a good boy." But Celine knew better. Cashin wasn't going home. He was coming for her. And he wasn't coming alone. The warehouse district by the river. There was only one place that could be, and Cashin would know it. More importantly, the police would know it. She just had to stay alive long enough for them to get here. "You know," she said conversationally, "you're going to lose." Victor laughed. "Am I?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like we've already won." "Have you?" Celine struggled to her feet, swaying slightly but managing to stay upright. "Because it seems to me like you're all running scared. Bombing buildings, killing witnesses, kidnapping women in the middle of the night. That doesn't sound like winning to me. That sounds like desperation." "Shut up," the unnamed man growled, pressing the gun harder against her skull. "You want to know what winning looks like?" Celine continued, her voice growing stronger. "Winning looks like Maria Santos standing up at that press conference and telling her story. Winning looks like Jennifer and Rebecca finding the courage to speak their truth. Winning looks like Isabella Martinez finally getting justice after 15 years. Isabella Martinez is a vegetable in a Swiss mental hospital," Victor sneered. "Is she?" Celine smiled. "Are you sure about that?" For the first time, she saw real uncertainty flicker across Victor's face. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe you should have checked on your handiwork more recently," Celine said. "Maybe you should have made sure that the woman you destroyed 15 years ago was still destroyed." It was another lie, but it was a good one. And in the distance, she could hear the faint sound of sirens approaching. Victor heard them too. His head snapped up, eyes scanning the empty lot around them. "Police," he said. "How did they?" "Because you're not as smart as you think you are," Celine said. "And because the man who loves me is smarter than all of you combined." The sirens were getting closer now, and she could see the flash of red and blue lights reflecting off the warehouse windows. Victor grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh hard enough to bruise. "You set us up." "No," Celine said, and for the first time in years, she felt truly powerful. "You set yourselves up. I just gave them the address." The first police car rounded the corner of the warehouse, followed by another, then another. In seconds, the lot was flooded with light and sound and armed officers shouting commands. "Drop your weapons. Get on the ground. Now." Victor's companion immediately threw down his gun and raised his hands, but Victor held on to Celine, using her as a human shield. "Stay back," he shouted. "I'll kill her." "No," said a familiar voice from behind the police line. "You won't." Cashin stepped into view, flanked by 2 FBI agents. Even in the chaos of flashing lights and shouting officers, his eyes found hers immediately. "Because if you hurt her," he continued, his voice carrying clearly across the lot, "I will spend every dollar I have and every connection I've built making sure you suffer for it. And trust me, Victor, I have a lot of dollars and a lot of connections." "You think your money scares me?" Victor snarled. "No," Cashin said calmly. "But this should." He held up a thick manila folder. "Copies of every document you destroyed tonight. Every witness statement, every piece of forensic evidence, every psychiatric report from Switzerland. All of it." Victor's face went white. "That's impossible." "Is it? You see, Victor, I learned something very important from my father's business dealings. Never put all your eggs in one basket. The evidence in my building was real, but it was also bait. The real evidence has been in FBI custody since the day after the press conference." Celine felt Victor's grip on her arm loosen slightly as the implication sank in. "Which means," Cashin continued, "that everything you've done tonight, the bombing, the murder of Maria Santos, the kidnapping of Celine, all of it was for nothing. You've only made your situation worse." "But Dorian said." "Dorian lied to you," one of the FBI agents called out. "Just like he's been lying to everyone else. We've been watching him for weeks, Victor. We know about the Swiss accounts, the shell companies, the payments to silence witnesses. We know everything." The fight went out of Victor all at once. His shoulders sagged, and his grip on Celine's arm fell away completely. She didn't wait for permission. She ran. Across the gravel lot, past the police cars, straight into Cashin's arms. He caught her against his chest, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she didn't care. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered into her hair. "When I got to your hotel and saw the blood, I thought." "I'm okay," she said, pulling back to look at his face. "I'm okay because you taught me how to be strong again." "You were always strong," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "I just helped you remember." Behind them, she could hear Victor being read his rights, could see the FBI agents leading him toward one of the police cars. It was over. Finally, truly over. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now." Cashin smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise. "Now we go home. Now we heal. Now we build something beautiful together." "And Dorian?" "Dorian is going to spend the rest of his life in prison," one of the FBI agents said, approaching them. "We arrested him 20 minutes ago trying to access that safety deposit box. He's being charged with 4 counts of murder, multiple counts of domestic violence, witness intimidation, and about a dozen other felonies." Celine closed her eyes, feeling a weight she'd carried for years finally lift from her shoulders. "It's really over," she whispered. "It's really over," Cashin confirmed. "And now the rest of your life can begin." As they walked toward his car, Celine looked back once at the warehouse where she had almost died, where she had almost become another victim in Dorian's long list of destroyed women. But she hadn't died. She had survived. She had fought back. She had won. And tomorrow, when the sun rose on a world where Dorian Caliph could never hurt another woman, she would begin the most important chapter of her life. The chapter where she learned to live again. What do you think will happen when Celine finally faces Dorian in court? Will she find the strength to testify against the man who nearly destroyed her? Let me know in the comments what you think her next step should be. 6 months later, Celine stood before the mirror in the courthouse bathroom, adjusting the navy blue blazer that had once belonged to her former self, the woman who had commanded boardrooms and closed million-dollar deals before Dorian Caliph had systematically destroyed her confidence. Today, she would destroy him back. "You don't have to do this," Cashin said softly from behind her. He had been waiting outside the bathroom, respecting her need for a moment alone while staying close enough to offer support. "Yes, I do." Celine turned to face him, and he was struck again by the transformation he'd witnessed over the past 6 months. The broken woman he'd found bleeding on a hotel room floor had been replaced by someone stronger, someone who had reclaimed not just her voice but her power. "Not just for me. For all of them." Through the courthouse windows, she could see the media circus that had been building for weeks. Dorian Caliph's trial had become the most watched legal proceeding of the decade. The story of the serial killer who had masqueraded as a successful businessman, who had murdered 3 wives and driven a 4th to madness, had captivated the nation. But more than that, it had given voice to countless other women who had suffered in silence. "The prosecutor says they have enough evidence to convict him without your testimony," Cashin reminded her gently. "The forensic evidence from Switzerland, the financial records, Victor's confession." "Evidence can be disputed," Celine interrupted. "Lawyers can create reasonable doubt about documents and bank records. But they can't dispute this." She touched her throat, where the faint scar from Dorian's last beating was still visible. "They can't dispute the truth when it comes from the only woman who survived him." Cashin nodded, understanding. Over the past 6 months, as Celine had healed both physically and emotionally, he had watched her transform her trauma into purpose. She had started a foundation for domestic violence survivors. She had lobbied for changes in how law enforcement handled abuse cases. She had become the voice for women who had been silenced. But this, testifying against Dorian in open court, this was the final step in her journey from victim to survivor to warrior. "I'll be right there," he promised, taking her hands in his. "In the front row. If you need to look at someone, look at me." "I won't need to," Celine said, and her smile was fierce. "I'm not afraid of him anymore." The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Celine could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on her as she walked down the aisle toward the witness stand, but she kept her gaze fixed straight ahead. She had learned over the past 6 months that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was feeling the fear and choosing to act anyway. As she passed the defendant's table, she allowed herself one glance at Dorian. He looked smaller than she remembered. Prison had not been kind to him. His once perfect hair was gray and thinning, his expensive suits replaced by an orange jumpsuit. But it was his eyes that struck her most. They were the same cold, calculating eyes that had watched her bleed, that had planned her death, that had destroyed so many women before her. Those eyes met hers now, and she saw him smile slightly, as if he still believed he had power over her. He was about to learn how wrong he was. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth?" the bailiff asked as she placed her hand on the Bible. "I do," Celine said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Chun, approached the witness stand with a gentle smile. They had spent weeks preparing for this moment, going over every detail of Celine's marriage to Dorian, every instance of abuse, every manipulation. "Mrs. Araminta," Sarah began, using the name Celine had legally reclaimed after her divorce, "can you please tell the court how you first met the defendant?" And so Celine began to tell her story. She spoke about the charming man who had swept her off her feet, who had seemed so different from the wealthy, entitled men she usually encountered in her business circles. She described how he had courted her with poetry and flowers, how he had made her feel like the most important person in the world. "When did that change?" Sarah asked. "The night we returned from our honeymoon," Celine said, her voice steady. "I had received a call from my business partner about a deal that needed my immediate attention. When I told Dorian I needed to fly back to New York for a few days, She paused, remembering. "He hit me. Across the face. Hard enough to split my lip." A murmur ran through the courtroom. In the front row, she could see Cashin's hands clenched into fists, his jaw tight with controlled anger. "What did you do?" I was shocked. I asked him why he had done that, and he said it was because I was being disrespectful. That a wife's place was with her husband, not running around the country playing businesswoman. Celine's voice grew stronger. He said if I ever put my work before him again, the consequences would be much worse. Did you believe him? I wanted to believe it was a one-time thing, that the stress of the wedding and honeymoon had made him act out of character. Celine looked directly at the jury. I was wrong. For the next 2 hours, Celine methodically detailed the escalating pattern of abuse. The way Dorian had isolated her from friends and family. The way he had convinced her to liquidate her assets to fund his business ventures. The way the physical violence had grown worse and more frequent. He was very careful, she explained. He never hit me anywhere that would show when I was dressed. Never broke bones that would require medical attention. He was a master at inflicting maximum pain while leaving minimal evidence. "Mrs. Araminta," Sarah said gently, "I need to ask you about the night you finally left. Can you tell the court what happened?" This was the hardest part. Celine took a deep breath, drawing strength from the knowledge that her words might save other women from the same fate. "He had been drinking," she began. "More than usual. His business was struggling. I found out later it was because the FBI had frozen several of his accounts as part of their investigation. He was angry, looking for someone to blame." She described the beating that had left her spitting blood, the way Dorian had screamed at her about his mistress, Leora, demanding that Celine apologize for not being woman enough to keep him satisfied. "He said he was going to kill me," Celine continued, her voice never wavering. "He said he was tired of dealing with me, that it would be easier to just get rid of me and start over with someone new. Someone more obedient." "What did you do?" "I ran." Celine's eyes found Cashin's in the crowd. "For the first time in 3 years, I fought back and I ran. And I survived." The defense attorney, a slick man named Robert Hayes who specialized in defending wealthy criminals, approached for cross-examination with the confidence of someone who believed he could break her. He was about to learn that Celine Araminta was unbreakable. "Mrs. Araminta," Hayes began, his tone condescending, "isn't it true that you had significant financial problems before your marriage to my client?" "I had business debts, yes. Like most entrepreneurs." "Debts totaling over $2 million? "Yes." "And isn't it true that marrying my client solved those financial problems?" Celine smiled coldly. "Marrying your client cost me $73 million and nearly my life. If that's your definition of solving financial problems, I'd hate to see what you consider a disaster." A ripple of laughter ran through the courtroom, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. Hayes tried a different approach. "You've admitted to having mental health struggles during your marriage. Depression, anxiety." "Yes," Celine interrupted. "I was depressed and anxious because I was being systematically tortured by a man who enjoyed inflicting pain. That's a normal response to an abnormal situation. But isn't it possible that your mental state affected your perception of events? That what you interpreted as abuse was simply—" "Are you seriously suggesting," Celine said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade, "that I imagined being beaten unconscious? That I hallucinated the broken ribs, the concussions, the internal bleeding?" Hayes faltered. "I'm simply suggesting that memory can be unreliable." "My memory is perfectly reliable," Celine said, standing up in the witness box. "And so is this." She pulled out her phone and held it up for the court to see. "What is that?" the judge asked. "A recording," Celine said. "From the night I left. I had started recording our conversations weeks earlier, hoping to gather evidence. This is from the night he tried to kill me." The courtroom erupted. Hayes was objecting, the prosecutor was arguing, and the judge was calling for order. But through it all, Celine remained standing, her phone held high like a weapon. "Your Honor," Sarah Chen said once order was restored, "the prosecution would like to enter this recording as evidence." "Objection!" Hayes shouted. "This evidence wasn't disclosed during discovery." "Because we didn't know it existed," Sarah replied. Mrs. Araminta only remembered she had made this recording last week, during our final preparation sessions. The trauma of that night had caused her to block out many details. The judge considered for a long moment. "I'll allow it. But first, Mrs. Araminta, please explain to the court how you came to make this recording." Celine sat back down, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I had been documenting the abuse for weeks, hoping to build a case for divorce. That night, when I saw how drunk and angry he was, I started recording as soon as he entered the room. I thought—" She paused, remembering. "I thought if something happened to me, at least there would be evidence." The recording was played for the court, and the silence that followed was deafening. Dorian's voice, slurred with alcohol and rage, filled the courtroom. "You worthless bitch. Think you can embarrass me? Going to teach you a lesson you'll never forget. Should have killed you years ago like I did the others." And then the sounds of violence. The impact of fists on flesh. Celine's cries of pain. Dorian's laughter. When it ended, several jurors were wiping away tears. In the gallery, Cashin's face was white with fury. And at the defendant's table, Dorian Califf looked like a man who had just heard his own death sentence. "No further questions," Hayes said quietly, his earlier confidence completely shattered. But Celine wasn't finished. "Your Honor," she said, "I have something else I'd like to say." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Celine stood again, this time turning to face Dorian directly. "For 3 years," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom, "you made me believe I was worthless. You convinced me that I deserved the pain you inflicted. You told me that no one would ever love me the way you did." Dorian's lawyer was tugging at his sleeve, telling him not to react, but Dorian couldn't help himself. He was staring at Celine with a mixture of rage and disbelief, as if he couldn't understand how his perfectly controlled victim had become this powerful woman standing before him. "You were wrong," Celine continued. "About all of it. I am not worthless. I did not deserve what you did to me. And the way you loved me, if you can even call it love, was not love at all. It was possession. It was control. It was the desperate need of a weak man to feel powerful by destroying someone stronger than himself." She took a step closer to the defendant's table. "But here's what you never understood, Dorian. You never actually broke me. You bent me, you hurt me, you nearly killed me, but you never broke me. Because the woman you tried to destroy was stronger than you ever imagined." Dorian finally spoke, his voice a harsh whisper that somehow carried through the silent courtroom. "You think you've won? You think this changes anything? I made you who you are. Without me, you're nothing." Celine smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing Cashin had ever seen. "You're right," she said. "You did make me who I am. You made me a survivor. You made me a fighter. You made me someone who will spend the rest of her life making sure that no other woman ever has to endure what I endured." She turned back to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not asking you to convict Dorian Califf because of what he did to me. I'm asking you to convict him because of what he'll do to the next woman if you don't. Because there will be a next woman. There always is, with men like him." She paused, letting that sink in. "I was lucky. I survived. Patricia Thornfield, Amanda Cross, and Maria Santos were not so lucky. Isabella Martinez spent 15 years in a mental institution because of this man. How many more women will suffer if you let him walk free?" The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. As the verdict was read, Celine felt a weight she had carried for years finally lift from her shoulders. In the gallery, she could see other survivors, women who had found the courage to come forward because of her example, crying tears of relief and vindication. Dorian was led away in shackles, and as he passed the gallery, he looked directly at Celine one last time. "This isn't over," he mouthed. "Yes," Celine said aloud, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom, "it is." Outside the courthouse, the media was waiting. Dozens of reporters, cameras, microphones thrust toward her face as she emerged into the afternoon sunlight with Cashin at her side. "Mrs. Araminta, how do you feel about the verdict? What's next for you? Do you have a message for other abuse survivors?" Celine paused at the top of the courthouse steps, Cashin's hand warm and steady in hers, and looked out at the crowd of reporters and supporters who had gathered. "I have something to say," she announced, and the crowd fell silent. "To every woman who is living in fear right now, who is being told she's worthless, who is being hurt by someone who claims to love her, I want you to know that you are not alone. You are not crazy. You are not imagining things. And you are stronger than you know." Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. "It took me 3 years to find the courage to leave. It took me 6 more months to find the courage to speak out. But I want you to know that it's never too late to reclaim your life. It's never too late to remember who you were before someone tried to convince you that you were nothing." She squeezed Cashin's hand, drawing strength from his presence. "And to the men and women who love someone who is being abused, don't give up on them. Don't stop believing in their strength, even when they can't see it themselves. Sometimes all it takes is one person who sees our worth to remind us that we're worth saving." The crowd erupted in applause, and Celine felt tears streaming down her face, not tears of pain this time, but tears of joy, of relief, of hope for the future. As they walked down the courthouse steps together, Cashin leaned close to her ear. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered. "You just changed the world." "We changed the world," Celine corrected, stopping to face him. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "Yes, you could have," Cashin said seriously. "You're the strongest person I've ever known, Celine Araminta. You always were. I just had the privilege of watching you remember it." And there, on the steps of the courthouse where justice had finally been served, surrounded by supporters and survivors and the promise of a better future, Cashin Draven dropped to one knee. "Celine," he said, pulling out a ring that caught the afternoon sunlight like captured starfire, "will you marry me? Not because you need me, but because I need you. Not because you're broken and need fixing, but because you're whole and perfect, and I want to spend the rest of my life loving you the way you deserve to be loved." The crowd around them had gone silent, cameras flashing, everyone holding their breath. Celine looked down at this man who had saved her life by teaching her to save herself, who had loved her back to wholeness, who had stood by her through the darkest chapters of her story and helped her write a new ending. "Yes," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the afternoon air. "Yes, I'll marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, the crowd erupted in cheers. But Celine barely heard them. All she could hear was the sound of her own heart, beating strong and free and full of hope for the future. The nightmare was over. The rest of her. 2 years later, Celine stood in the garden of the home she and Cashin had built together, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. In her hands, she held a letter that had arrived the day before, a letter that would have terrified her once, but now only filled her with a quiet sense of closure. It was from Isabella Martinez. After 15 years in a Swiss psychiatric facility, Isabella had finally been declared competent to stand trial as a witness in the civil case against Dorian's estate. More importantly, she had been declared sane, her mind slowly healing from the chemical torture that had stolen so many years of her life. "Dear Celine," the letter began in careful, precise handwriting. "I wanted to thank you for giving me back my voice. For 15 years, I screamed the truth into the void, and no one believed me. Because of your courage, the world finally knows what Dorian Calith really was. Because of you, I am free." Celine smiled, folding the letter carefully and tucking it into the pocket of her robe. Through the French doors behind her, she could hear the sounds of her household waking up, Cashin moving around in the kitchen, probably making his terrible coffee that she had learned to love anyway, and the soft patter of small feet on hardwood floors. Mama Celine. She turned to see 7-year-old Emma Santos running toward her, dark curls bouncing, still in her pajamas. Maria Santos's daughter, who had come to live with them 6 months ago when Maria's husband had been deployed overseas and couldn't care for 3 children alone. "Good morning, sweetheart," Celine said, scooping Emma into her arms. "Did you sleep well?" "I had the dream again," Emma said, snuggling against Celine's shoulder. "The one where Mama comes back." Celine's heart clenched. Emma still struggled with nightmares about her mother's death, still sometimes forgot that Maria wasn't coming home. But she was healing, slowly, surrounded by love and stability and the knowledge that she was safe. "Tell me about the dream," Celine said gently, carrying Emma to the garden swing that Cashin had built under the old oak tree. "Mama was wearing her pretty blue dress," Emma said as they settled onto the swing together. "And she told me she was proud of me for being brave. She said she was proud of you too, for stopping the bad man." Tears pricked at Celine's eyes. "Your mama was very brave, Emma. And she would be so proud of the strong, kind girl you're becoming. Do you think she can see us? From heaven?" "I think," Celine said carefully, "that love doesn't end when someone dies. I think your mama's love for you is still here, in your heart, helping you be brave every day." Emma considered this seriously, then nodded. "Like how you help me be brave." "Exactly like that." They swung in comfortable silence for a while, watching the garden come alive in the morning light. Celine had designed this space herself, a healing garden filled with flowers that bloomed in every season, a place where broken things could grow strong again. It had become a sanctuary not just for her family, but for the dozens of women who came through the Araminta Foundation each year. Women who needed a safe place to remember who they were before someone tried to convince them they were nothing. "Celine." Cashin's voice called from the house. "Phone for you. It's Dr. Chun." Dr. Sarah Chun, the prosecutor who had become a close friend and now served on the Foundation's board of directors. Celine kissed the top of Emma's head and went inside to take the call. "Sarah? What's wrong?" It was barely 7 in the morning, too early for a social call. "Nothing's wrong," Sarah said, and Celine could hear the excitement in her voice. "Everything's right. The Supreme Court just handed down their decision in the Martinez case." Celine's breath caught. They had been waiting for months for the court's ruling on whether victims of domestic violence could sue their abuser's estate for damages even after the abuser's death. And unanimous decision in favor of Isabella. The court ruled that domestic violence is a form of intentional tort that survives the perpetrator's death. Isabella is entitled to full compensation from Dorian's estate, which, thanks to your testimony about the money he stole from you, is worth about $40 million. Celine sank into a chair, overwhelmed. $40 million. Every penny he had. And more importantly, the ruling sets a precedent. Every victim of domestic violence in this country now has legal recourse, even if their abuser dies before they can seek justice. "Sarah, this is..." Celine couldn't find words. "This is what happens when one woman finds the courage to speak the truth," Sarah said softly. "You didn't just save yourself, Celine. You changed the law. You gave every victim a path to justice." After they hung up, Celine sat in her kitchen for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Through the window, she could see Emma playing with their dog, a golden retriever named Hope that they had rescued from a shelter. Cashin was at the stove, making pancakes in the shape of butterflies because Emma had mentioned liking them once. This was her life now. Not the life she had planned when she was 25 and conquering the business world, but the life she had chosen after learning what really mattered. "Good news?" Cashin asked, sliding a cup of coffee across the counter to her. "The best news," she said, and told him about the Supreme Court decision. Cashin whistled low. "Isabella's going to be able to rebuild her entire life." "All of them are," Celine said. "Every woman who was told she had no recourse, no options, no hope, They all have hope now. Because of you. Because of all of us, Celine corrected. Because Isabella was brave enough to testify. Because you were brave enough to help a stranger. Because Maria was brave enough to speak out, even knowing the risks. She looked out at Emma, who was now teaching Hope to sit and stay with the patience of someone far older than her 7 years. Because that little girl is brave enough to keep living and loving even after losing her mother. Cashin followed her gaze. She's lucky to have you. We're lucky to have each other, Celine said, leaning into his warmth. All of us. The doorbell rang, and Cashin went to answer it while Celine called Emma in for breakfast. But instead of Emma, a young woman appeared in the kitchen doorway, maybe 22 or 23, with dark hair and frightened eyes and a bruise on her cheek that she had tried to cover with makeup. Mrs. Draven, the woman said hesitantly. I'm sorry to bother you so early, but I saw the news about the Supreme Court case, and She took a shaky breath. I need help. Celine's heart went out to her immediately. She had seen that look so many times, the desperate hope warring with the fear that no one would believe her, that no one would help. What's your name? Celine asked gently. Rachel. Rachel Morrison. I've been married for 2 years, and my husband, She touched the bruise on her cheek unconsciously. I saw you on the news during the trial. I saw how strong you were, and I thought maybe if you could get out, maybe I could too. You can, Celine said firmly. And you will. Come sit down. Let me make you some coffee, and we'll figure this out together. As Rachel sank into a chair at the kitchen table, Emma bounced into the room, took one look at the crying woman, and immediately went to her toy box. She returned with a small stuffed elephant, her most prized possession. Here, Emma said, pressing the elephant into Rachel's hands. Mr. Peanuts always makes me feel better when I'm sad. You can borrow him. Rachel looked down at the little girl with wonder. Thank you, sweetheart. That's very kind. Mama Celine says that when we help other people feel better, it makes the whole world a little bit brighter, Emma explained seriously. And the world needs to be brighter, don't you think? Yes, Rachel said, tears streaming down her face as she hugged the stuffed elephant. I think it does. And as Celine sat down across from Rachel, ready to help another woman reclaim her life, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The pain, the fear, the long nights when she thought she would never be whole again. All of it had led her here. To this kitchen, with this family she had chosen and this work that gave her life meaning. To the knowledge that her suffering had not been meaningless, that it had been transformed into something powerful, something that could heal others. Tell me your story, Celine said to Rachel, the same words Cashin had said to her that night in the hotel lobby when her old life ended and her new one began. And as Rachel began to speak, as Emma played quietly with Hope in the corner, as Cashin moved around the kitchen making breakfast for everyone, Celine felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. She had been broken once. Shattered into so many pieces, she thought she could never be whole again. But she had been wrong. She wasn't the same woman she had been before Dorian Caliph entered her life. She was stronger. She wasn't the same woman who had cowered in that penthouse, accepting cruelty as love. She was wiser. She wasn't the same woman who had believed she deserved the pain. She was healed. And every day she helped other women discover the same truth she had learned, that they were stronger than they knew, braver than they believed, and worthy of love that lifted them up instead of tearing them down. Outside, the sun climbed higher in the sky, painting the world in shades of gold and possibility. Inside, around a kitchen table in a house filled with love, another woman began the journey from victim to survivor to warrior. And Celine Araminta Draven, who had once lost everything and found something better, smiled and poured another cup of coffee. The nightmare was over. The dream had just begun. Celine's story shows us that no matter how dark things get, there's always hope for a new beginning. If you or someone you know is in an abusive relationship, please know that help is available. You are stronger than you know, and you deserve love that heals instead of hurts. Share this story if it touched your heart, and let's keep spreading the message that every survivor's voice matters.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you love this story, you will surely enjoy the next one. It's crazier and more intriguing than you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.